Today we got a brief guide and tour for the Energy Controller archetype from Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition, the Basic Heroes Handbook. So the Energy Controller class is all about putting out a bunch of a type of energy that you select at character creation, and in the form of range damage, and sometimes crowd control, and sometimes defense. Mostly though, you're sort of the big gun of the team, attack at range, and also, though depending on your choices, kind of a glass cannon. You're not so good at taking run-of-the-mill damage. In fact, in general, our defenses aren't that good. Everything else is actually a little bit less overall than, say, the crime fighter, which we talked about last time. So in terms of just taking raw damage, they do tend to be a bit more resilient than the crime fighter. They are actually super, after all, but this won't become quite apparent until you actually pick your power suite, and some of those vary. Some are more active, some more passive. We'll get to that in a minute. Another thing worth noting about the Energy Controller is that they're not so big on the skills, especially compared to the Crime Fighter. On average, the Crime Fighter, when you picked a skill area to focus on, you'd get 20 points worth of skill ranks across 3 to 4 different skills. Here though, you only get 4 points each for 2 different skills. This is on top of the stealth and combat skills that the crime fighter normally gets. Here though, each one of our options, of which we can pick 2, athletics, charm, observation, piloting, subterfuge, each one of those gives us 4 ranks each of 2 different skills, so far less skill focused, though we do get a big boost to one of 2 different talking skills, and of course some range combat as well, which is nice. So all energy controllers can reliably attack at range pretty well, and also talk in some manner of speaking. Pun intended. Let's move on to the power suites. We have 3, of course, as we always do. We have the Avatar, the Blaster, and the Elementalist. The Avatar, you don't simply project power, you are power, and you can transform into a living battery. This gives you some mobility, you can fly around with the flame on, human torch kind of thing going on. Also, this really gives you a big boost to your defenses. Also, like the flame on thing, you are covered in your energy, so that's going to have some ramifications. You could hurt things, which may be good or bad, depending on your situation. You might want to hurt the thing you're touching, maybe not. Have to turn off your form to grab a civilian, but now you just have to walk around like a schmuck. Otherwise you'll set him on fire, or electrocute him, or whatever else. Anyway, as far as our active powers go, it's mostly focused on damage. There's some good single target and area of effect. There's also a little bit of crowd control in here. The Blaster is the most combat focused of the 3. No crowd control or any of that garbage. Just do all the damage to all of the bad guys. Both area of effect and single target. There's some different shapes you have to work with, some flexibility in that regard, but you're all about doing damage. You also have the best passive defense. The others have good defense as well, but they tend to be more active, and if something happens, the force field could go down, or the form, they're out of their form, and whatever. This, it's harder to be caught with your pants down. Although you can literally be caught with your pants down, because part of your defense comes from a supersuit. So if you're in your civilian garb, you don't get as much protection, but still a decent amount of protection from other sources as well. There's a diversified level of defenses here, which is nice. The Elementalist has a lot of fine control over their powers. Typically this would be someone who's a bit more experienced, maybe less of a hothead. Now immediately you might think of this as well suited for a fire controller like Pyro, and that was my first instinct too, except they have a thing that allows you to create solid objects. Specifically, that's what it says, solid objects. Though I guess if you're a fire guy, you create fire objects. Are they solid? Are they made of molten steel or something? Or how does that work? Or is it just you create a fiery object which behaves like a solid, and people could just walk through it and take damage, right? It's not really a solid object. This bothers me enough to where I would never play this particular power suite, the Elementalist, unless I was playing like an ice guy, or maybe a weather person, and only create ice things, or maybe, gravity is also good. Gravity works. Sound, that can affect the physical world. I don't know, maybe I'm just being really anal about it, but that bothers me. Unless there's something else here that covers create energy stuff, maybe in the old book, I don't remember. I don't know, it kind of works, I guess. I'm not a fan. Anyway, we got some decent area of effect and single target damage, though not as much as the blaster. Although technically a better single target damage than the blaster in some ways, depending on your point of view. Raw damage and also flexibility, where the damage can come from, because you could call lightning from the sky. That might give you an advantage. The blaster, though, while their raw damage isn't as high, they're really good at really hardened targets, so that's something to consider. Their area of effect damage is pretty weak compared to the other two. Though in the grand scheme of things, it's still perfectly fine damage, just not as good area of effect damage as the other two. And you have that flexibility of creating objects, which I think is really great. I love the create effect in this game. There's some cool things you could do with it, trapping people or dropping objects on top of people, which, is that really any different than area effect damage? I don't think it is off the top of my head. Anyway, you can sense your element, which could have some flexibility depending on what your element is exactly. And some nice choice with the movement. Not as fast as the Avatar, I guess that makes sense, you can turn into living energy, but definitely faster than the Blaster, who gets no movement capability. I just realized the Blaster is Cyclops. How did I not notice that until now? The Blaster is clearly Cyclops. We got Human Torch, Cyclops, and Storm. Skills. I would probably focus on talking. Charm helps you with the talking skill you don't have, and also another thing that's tangentially related to talking. That's my big recommendation. Odds are you might be the big talker of the group, though it depends. You at least can contribute in the one big talking skill you already get. This gives you some more flexibility while also leaning hard into that. So that's the way I would go. As far as advantages, your attacks, the way they are, you're a decent mix of accuracy and damage, or effectiveness, I should say. So getting your hands on the power attack or accurate attack advantages, or even both, could be a pretty decent way to go, give you some flexibility there. Also, because you're fairly accurate, and it couldn't hurt to have a bit more defensive in some cases. There is one that allows you to sacrifice some accuracy for defense, so that might be helpful, but I would focus mostly on the doing damage thing. I think that's what people are really expecting from you. But it depends on the rest of your choices. Anyway, that is it for today. Next time, we're going to cover the Gadgeteer.